Trigger warning. Got to get deep and personal on this one. A little self-reflecting, a little reflection on others. If me talking about topics like this is something that might upset you, the topic of a game ending, then please stop watching now, as it may trigger you. And, trigger consent, not safe for work, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de. Hello and welcome. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM, and welcome to episode number 2 of the long, dark tea time of Why Games End, a topic we're going to be discussing for the rest of the month before we move back to November building games again, because I think it's important, because all things end. And that's okay, because nothing ever ends, and from endings become beginnings, and sometimes it's okay for things to end. Sometimes things need to end, sometimes so that new things can grow. And we're talking about games ending and why games ending, especially now during COVID. A lot of the things that I'm hearing and a lot of the things I'm personally experiencing is games ending. And maybe games need to end. Maybe this idea that a game can last 15 years, 30 years, that role-playing games don't have an end is antiquated, because we've all grown up and lives have changed. The world has changed. The hobby has changed. The very fundamentals of role-playing has changed. So, 20, 30 years ago when I was in, Studio City playing in TJ's game, it was okay. The setting was perfect to be able to play every Sunday from, 7 to 10 with the same group of people for 15 years. And TJ was such a good DM that was able to do 15 years. And we were such a well-grown, well-worked together, group of friends and group of people that we were able to tell consistent stories for 15 years. But that was a one-time thing, and I don't know if that can happen on a regular basis. I think games have to end. Now, today's topic about why games end is expectations. Now, obviously, I have talked on and on and on again about having to deal with the Mercer effect and the current culture generation of gamers who are coming to the table, players, and expecting the game to be like Critical Role, expecting the DM to have the same level of skill as Matt Mercer, and expecting themselves and the other players to play at the same level as the people on Critical Role, to play at the same level as Sam and Laura and Marisha and Travis and Tailsland and Matt Mercer. The Mercer effect has been documented. We've talked about it. We've talked about how much I hate it. My personal feelings for Critical Role. If me talking about Critical Role is something that's going to upset you, you should probably stop watching. Gonna build a game. Best game. I keep doing Trump. I don't know why. Because I'm voting for Joe. Vote for Joe. So expectations. We've talked a lot about player expectations and the level of stress Critical Role has put on gamers and GMs and the hobby itself over the past 5 years or whatever, how long Critical Role has been on. But now I want to address DM expectations, and to a lesser extent, nostalgia. Nostalgia is a horrible drug. So, addressing the Mercer effect from a player's point of view, we've done. Other people have done it better than I have. Even Matt Mercer himself has discussed it and how he doesn't like people holding him up as the end-all, be-all. But, of course, he's still taking their money, so. But we don't talk a lot about DM expectations and DM nostalgia and DMs or game masters with the expecting that their game to be a certain way and expecting their players to be a certain way and expecting the game as it is now to be like it was then. To think, well, I ran a really great game a couple years ago with this group of players using my style, so I expect that I can do the same thing. So recently I had a game come to an end that I'd been in for about a year. And one of the reasons I think it ended is because the DM expected certain things from the players that just wasn't happening. He expected them to tell the story he wanted to hear and he wanted to tell. And that wasn't the story the players wanted to tell. And he expected them to live with the rule changes he was making and his attempts to try and make 5th edition something it wasn't. And they weren't having that. And he expected them to work together as a cohesive group. And just, they didn't. And when they didn't, he just expected it to work out on itself. And it didn't. And he expected games now to be like they were then. And I have the same problem. I have had amazing experiences as a player, amazing experiences as a DM. I suffer from nostalgia horribly of just, oh, well, it was great then, so if I tell the same story, it'll still be great. But you just can't do that anymore. You can't expect players to live up to the expectations of the way things was, and you can't have expectations of players and then, because inevitably those expectations fall apart. As groups, especially now, it's more difficult for people to work together. It's more difficult for people to communicate together. It's more difficult for these conflicting personalities that this situation, COVID, and the world and the way gaming has evolved, to work together. You can't have a 54-year-old gamer who's used to a very OSR style, of 3.5 like me, and who, wants to tell very quirky skill monkey character stories and wants to be able to optimize the character but still have a good story and wants to know, what he does matters, but still also have that EP and stuff flavor that I, experience. And I've been very lucky to experience that. But then you can't have me or the player like me sitting at the same table as, some 20-year-old who expects the game to be like Critical Role and expects that they're just going to get handed the world because that's what they're used to and they're young and cute. And you can't put that player at the same table with the girl who thinks, well, you have the hots for me, so whatever I do, I'm just going to get and I don't have to contribute. And you can't have players who are contributing and are giving into player agency and are investing at the same table with players who are just dropping foul, F-bombs and dick jokes and just want to sit there to, drink beer and I did it for the lols. You can't have those conflicting personalities. You can't expect people to be the same way they were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because we've all grown up. We've all changed. We're all different. I'm different than I was 10 years ago. And I'm different than a 40-year-old, 30-year-old, 20-year-old, and 15-year-old gamer. My expectations are different as a player and as a DM. And sometimes it's very hard to let those expectations go and just let the game be what it is. And it's very hard to expect games to not be what they are. So, like, expecting D&D to be something other than D&D, that is a horrible expectation. Expecting DMs to run at the same level that Matt Mercer runs, that's a horrible expectation. Expecting players to play at the same level as the players at Critical Role play, that's a horrible expectation. Expecting players to play the way they played a year ago when they were all together and they were all one cohesive group of friends, as opposed to now when they're on COVID and they're separated and they haven't seen each other for a long time, and we've all sort of become these secular, independent organisms who don't really know how to work around people anymore because we've been away from people for almost a year. So I think one of the reasons, much like yesterday, we talked about lack of communication being a reason why games end. Expectations of people, of yourself as a game master, of the game, of groups, and then when those expectations fail, or they don't live up to the expectations, we have expectations of you, the GM. You, the GM, have expectations of us, the players. We have expectations of the way the game we think is going to work. And then when those expectations are failed to be met, the game falls apart. And again, it comes back to the first part communication, because we're not communicating those expectations, and the DM isn't communicating the story he wants to tell, and the players are not communicating what they want. We can ask. We've talked about this yesterday. We can ask, but inevitably, 9 out of 10 times, people will say, "Oh, it's fine." As a DM, you can post, "Hey, send me a DM, send me a Facebook message, send me a text about what you want and what you don't want, and what you did enjoy about the game and what you didn't enjoy about the game, and what your expectations are." But we don't respond because we have been trained in our brains not to hurt people's feelings, not to communicate, not to show that we're upset because that is a sign of weakness, not to show that, we're angry because our expectations weren't met, so we're going to pout. But we don't know how to communicate that anymore, and we don't know how to let our expectations go and just be in the game. So, expectations. I had expectations. Those expectations were not met. I tried to work around them, but inevitably, somehow I contributed, though I don't think I contributed as much as I did, to the end of that game. And that's a responsibility I have to accept, and I have to be okay with it, because there's certain things I'm willing to say, yes, fine, I can let this go, and there's certain things where I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I can't let that go. Expectations. I expect to be treated a certain way. I expect certain things to happen at the game. I expect the world to work in a certain way. And sometimes I have to learn how to let those expectations go. Sometimes you, GMs, game masters, you have to learn to let those expectations go. Sometimes you, players, people, humans, you have to learn to let those expectations go and grow and change as the world grows and changes. So, expectations. That is our second episode of the long, dark tea time of role-playing games and why they end. If you appreciate this content and want to see more, please comment down below and let me know. And if you think I'm a total fucking idiot and should shut the fuck up, comment down below and let me know. And I will talk to you later. Subscribe!